Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Grant Cunningham, and welcome to Training Talk right here on Personal Defense Network. This is the show where we talk about you, your life, and how to protect it. In the next hour, we're going to explore how you can train and prepare yourself to face that worst case scenario and keep you and your family safe from harm. Now, we don't do religion or politics on this show, so you're not going to hear any sort of conspiracy theories or fringe commentary, just reliable information that you can put to use right away in your own life. And we think it's the responsible and reasonable way to approach self-defense. Now, if you like the show, if you like what we're doing here, would you be so kind as to share this with your friends and your family and your coworkers and relatives, all those people, and give them the same kind of benefit that you get from watching Training Talk, the great information that we talk about here. And I'm sure they'll appreciate that you thought enough of them to share it with them. So please share it away on the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those places. Share it with all your friends and have them tune in as well. So, well, good evening, everybody. If you're new to the show, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. And if you're returning, thank you for taking time out of your schedule once again to join us here. I really do appreciate it. And I try to not treat your time frivolously. In this show, we talk about things that are important to you and things that you can do to help keep yourself and your family safe. That's what we do here. You may have noticed I'm a little stuffed up today, and I may be doing this several times probably tonight. The allergies have really gotten to me this year. I never used to have allergies until about, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years ago, something like that. And all of a sudden, boom. After 50 years on this earth, all of a sudden I get allergies, and as a result, I'm stuffed up and got a tickle in my throat, all this sort of thing. I'm taking good drugs, and but it's just barely touching it. So I apologize for being a little scratchy tonight. I hope everybody had a great Independence Day holiday this week. Independence Day, I love Independence Day because it gives me a chance to reflect on all the great things about our country, the things that some other places in the world don't have. Did you know that there are actually places on this earth, and these are modern industrialized countries, where people are actually prosecuted for defending themselves? And I'm not talking about with a gun. I mean, defending themselves at all with baseball bats or hockey sticks or knives or whatever they have. There are actually places on this earth where the right of self-defense, the right to your own life, is not recognized like it is here in this country. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I can remember back when I was growing up, concealed carry, the idea of defending yourself with a handgun was not a popular topic. It was not common. In fact, there were very few states in the Union where you could carry a defensive firearm, and in quite a few of them, it was actually illegal. And looking back at a map of the early 1980s and looking at all the states that did not have any provision for carrying a defensive firearm, and then watching that map change over the past few decades to the point that now where the vast majority of states have some provision for a concealed carry of a defensive firearm. And virtually all of those are shall issue. In other words, as long as you meet the objective criteria put forth in the law, that your license to carry is immediately approved and issued. And that didn't used to be the case. It used to be, well, if the police chief or sheriff wanted you to have one, or you contributed to his campaign or whatever, you might get one. And there was a lot of subjectivity in that. And over the last few decades, what we've done is we've replaced that with objective rules that you have to meet to be able to carry a concealed handgun. And that has swept the nation. And there are very few states now that don't have some provision. There are a couple of states where there is a provision for concealed carry, but It's implemented in such a way as to be almost a de facto ban. Hawaii, for instance, is like that. The last article I read was written in, I think, late 2015 or early 2016. And at that point, there were no concealed carry licenses in the state of Hawaii. So there's still a few places in the country where there is, in fact, a de facto ban, despite the law technically allowing concealed carry. So we have some work to do there. But the vast majority of the country now, you are free to carry a concealed handgun, concealed firearm to defend your life or the life of innocence with. And I think that's a wonderful thing. It's something to celebrate on Independence Day. Now, along with the right to bear arms, the right to carry a firearm on your person for your defense, comes with the responsibility to do it properly, to not only just to shoot well, but also to understand the situations under which you can use lethal force. And I'll tell you this week, and I mentioned it to some people earlier today, and I mentioned that, it seems like in the last few months, we've seen a big increase in the number of um, people using their defensive firearms inappropriately. In some cases, using them to chase down mere shoplifters. We had one just the other day where a fellow shot, shot at the tires of a van that had gone through a red light and struck another vehicle. It turns out the driver was medically impaired, but this fellow found a need to try to shoot his tires out. By the way, that only works on TV. If you didn't know that, yeah, that only works on TV. So we still have a way to go to educate people in the proper use of lethal force, both in terms of legalities and in terms of physical control, in terms of practicalities. And well, how do you do that? Well, you take a class. You go and train, and you can train in all these things. You can train in the legalities. You can train in the physical skills of defensive shooting, and there are lots of places you can do that. Of course, this year, every spring, the Personal Defense Network sponsors a training tour where a lot of the contributors here at Personal Defense Network, including yours truly, uh, put on specific classes during the tour in areas around the country that maybe don't always get a lot of really good training opportunities. And so we do this every year, and this year's tour is starting to wind down. We're in the last couple of weeks, last 3 weeks, I think, of the tour, and as a result, there are just a few classes left. But I want to share these with you in case if you haven't gotten out and gotten some training this spring and taken advantage of the great classes that are on the tour, you don't have much time left. And so I'll share these with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go screen share here. And here we go. Screen share. And let's see here, present to everyone. I don't know why they do that, by the way. That's kind of a strange thing. But here we go. Here's the rest of the schedule for this month, because the training tour ends at the end of July. But we have coming up in Reno, Nevada, on this Sunday, and this is, I realize a couple of these are going to be short notice, but there may be openings in these classes. So if you have time this weekend, not doing anything else, and have a chance to go train, there may be some openings for you. You'll have to check. Go to the Personal Defense Network here and hit the training tab and go down to the tour dates and locations, and you get this schedule. And this weekend in Reno, Nevada, our friend Alessandro Padovani, who's been on the show, you may remember him, is doing a class in defensive focus shooting. That's a one-day class. Also, on the 9th and 10th, which is Sunday and Monday, I think, Rob Pincus is going to be in Boulder City, Nevada, teaching advanced pistol handling. And then on the 12th, Rob goes to Exeter, California, teaching one-day combat-focused carbine. If you're one of these people that has purchased, say, an AR-15 recently because of the great prices that are on AR-15s right now, here's your chance to learn how to use it appropriately in a defensive context. That's going to be in Exeter, California. In Briggsdale, Colorado, Craig Douglas is going to be teaching his Extreme Close Quarter Concepts course, and that's his flagship course dealing with the in contact fight and in contact weapons access. Tremendous course, definitely recommended. In Pryor Creek, Oklahoma, on the 15th of this month, Mike Seeklander is going to be teaching his defensive handgun retention course. That's a great one if you want to learn how to keep control of your handgun in a fight. On the 15th, also in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Michael Lowe is going to be teaching applied pistol concepts. And the 15th and 16th in Reno, Nevada, Rob Pincus is going to be teaching advanced pistol handling. Again, on the 15th and 16th, our friend Caleb Causey, and Caleb's been on the show a number of times. Caleb reminds us to drink water, and he's going to be teaching his Medic One course. And you may have heard me extol the virtues of getting a good trauma response, emergency response course under your belt. Here's a good way to do it. His 2-day course in Chicago, Illinois. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the 16th, Michael Lowe, again, is going to be teaching applied rifle concepts. On the 17th and 18th, Reno, Nevada, Rob Pincus is going to be teaching 2-person armed defense 2-day course. This is a relatively new course for Rob and the tour. What do you do if you and your wife encounter an incident that requires a lethal force response? How do you handle that? How do you coordinate that? Good course for that. And on the 21st through the 23rd in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Craig Douglas is again going to be teaching his Extreme Close Quarter Concepts course. He's gotten he's been all over the country during the tour this year, and so this is his last course in Coeur d'Alene. In Arabi, Louisiana. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Andrew Branca is going to be teaching his Law of Self-Defense Level 1 course. This is where you get that legal information that you really need to know to defend yourself within the bounds of the law and to use lethal force appropriately. I highly recommend that you attend this course if nothing else. Also on the 22nd in Henderson, Nevada, Alessandro Padovani is going to be back teaching his Safer, Faster Knife Fundamentals. This is what Ale is known for, is his knife defense courses. Definitely check that out. And the next day, the 23rd, he's going to be teaching women's personal protection fundamentals. Good class there. Andrew Branca, again, is going to be teaching his Law of Self-Defense classes in Arabi or whatever it is, Louisiana. Sorry, folks, I really don't know how that's pronounced. And then he'll be in Milton, Florida, teaching that as well. And the final course of the 2017 PDN Training Tour will be in Maple Falls, Washington, where Rob Pincus is going to be teaching fundamentals of combat-focused shooting. And that will wrap up training tour for this year. This has been the biggest tour we've had yet, more than 100 courses. I lost track of the number of people that were teaching this year. So if you haven't gotten out and taken advantage of all these great courses, you've got just a couple weeks left. So go to the training page here at Personal Defense Network, check out the dates, click on the courses you're interested in, and see if you can still get in. I know some of those are likely to be sold out, but there should be some openings, I'm sure, in various places. So that's it. That's my plug for the spring training tour this year. And of course, how do you find out about all this stuff? Well, sign up for the PDN weekly newsletter. But you'll find places all over the PDN site to sign up. If you're watching the show on the PDN page, there's a link down below where you can click. Don't do it now, wait till after the show, but there's a link I put down there that you can click on and sign up for the newsletter. And it comes out and it'll give you all the information about what's new on Personal Defense Network, some of the upcoming events, all that sort of thing. And that's how you keep up on all this stuff with the free Personal Defense Network newsletter. I use it. I get it. And I use it to keep up with what's going on here because even I can't keep up with all this stuff. For instance, it was through the PDN newsletter that I learned that my guest tonight had written a new article, and it came out in the newsletter. I said, "Oh, I got to read this," and sure enough, it was a good article. And so I asked the author, Clint Macro, to come back on the show. Clint's been on the show before to talk about his article on situational awareness. So that's what we're going to be talking about the rest of the evening. Clint, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Grant. It's great to be back. I appreciate you having me on again.
Well, it's great to have you, and in the most impressive set for a PDN contributor ever is in your studio. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I used a different microphone. Last time I was on, Barrett was giving me crap about the size of my microphone, so I decided to go with a little more modestly sized one today.
Okay. Excuse me. Well, I'm still stuck with the SM58. So
it's a fine microphone.
Anyway, so you wrote an article on situational awareness, and this is something we don't talk very much about. We spend a lot of time talking about shooting techniques and all that kind of thing, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about preventing having to use our firearm in the first place. And that's kind of where situational awareness gets us. So I wanted to start tonight by having you tell us, everybody's got a little different take on situational awareness. I have my own, and I know that that others have slightly different ones. So what I'd like to do is to start, tell us what you believe situational awareness is as a concept at its core.
Well, at its core, situational awareness, in my opinion, is just using the senses that God gave you to process information so that we can hopefully avoid bad situations. The one true and surefire way to win a confrontation is to not get into it to begin with. So if we're aware of our surroundings, we see unsavory people, we see unsavory situations, and we take steps to avoid putting ourselves in those situations, well, then there we win. And what made me call the article Unicorns in the Situational Awareness Rainbow was that actually two things that led me to that. My son, Augie, has been studying cryptids. And cryptids are mythical creatures. He'll probably want to correct me on the actual definition, but such as like Bigfoot and the Yeti and unicorns. And we were talking about them, and I mentioned, do you believe that there could be a unicorn? He actually broke out laughing and slapped his hand on his leg, and he says, seriously? He says, a horse with a horn on its head? There's no way. And that stuck in my head. And the next day I was doing a class, and one of the women there, an instructor candidate of mine, was talking about how she has been making herself sick in her daily life, trying to be 100% situationally aware all the time, because we teach in our courses that, it's your responsibility and you must always be in condition yellow. And that's well and good to say, but that's nearly impossible to put into practice. And she was actually making herself sick, trying to stay situationally aware. And when she would catch herself going to sleep or turning her back to a crowd, just living in a 360-degree world, she would get kind of small panic attacks. And I had a long conversation with her after the class, and it kind of, that combined with Augie's terminology on the unicorn led me to name the article and call it that. And incidentally, while I just started writing the article was when Rob was here doing some combat focus classes, and he was also talking about how, the same concept where situational awareness isn't something that can be done 100% of the time. And so that's what led me to write the article. So going back to as a concept, I think it's an excellent way to introduce people to the thought process of, if I take an information, I can keep myself out of bad situations. But when people start wearing that color code as a badge that they must always be in a particular condition, I think it's kind of BS. And it either ruins your quality of life or it sets you up for a big fail. So whereas I might be 100% situationally aware to what's in front of me, well, I'm probably not paying much attention to what's behind me if my focus is in front. So that's kind of the thought process on the article.
I think that's a good way of putting it, because you mentioned staying out of a fight is preferable. And I think it's important for everybody to understand when we talk about staying out of the fight. Uh, Sometimes I think we sort of have this fantasy of, oh gosh, I'm going to use my gun, or I'm going to use my wild martial arts skills to save myself or to save another person. And it's important to understand that anytime that you get into a fight, there is a greater than zero chance of it not working out in your favor. And you're right. The fight that you win, your best choice is to stay out of it. And you can't do that without information ahead of time. Um, so you talked about setting up for failure.
Mhm.
The idea that we're going to stay in condition yellow all the time. And I'm fascinated about this woman who actually made herself ill, because it's very, very tough to say switched on all the time. But you said it sets it can set you up for failure. So
Absolutely.
what do you mean by that?
Well, it puts us in with a false sense of security, much like this, in the same mindset when people practice consistently with traditional marksmanship style drills on the range, and then they think that they're going to perform very well in an ambush situation, and I think that is in turn is setting them up for a failure. So if I feel that I am situation aware all the time, then perhaps again I'm going to lose sight of the fact that I can't be situation aware 360 degrees. So if I'm paying close attention to these gentlemen over here or this situation over there, I'm not paying attention to what's behind me. And I think it's prudent that we recognize that and accept that. Maybe not necessarily embrace it, but it's definitely reality. And I think when we don't live in reality, we set ourselves up for a big surprise, a very big surprise. And I don't want that surprise to take place if my family's life depends on it.
Now,
So
isn't this kind of similar to the way in which a lot of savvy criminals will set up an attack where they will use something um, intended to draw your attention, to occupy all of your awareness so that they can distract you and get to you some other way. Is that the kind of problem you're talking about?
certainly can be. Certainly can be. We see the vagrant or someone come up. Hey, man, can you spare some change? I'm sure we've had that happen. Someone coming up asking for time. If we focus then on that individual and we create the distance and we posture or whatever it is that we're going to do to de-escalate that situation, we lose sight of the fact that there might be some guy coming up behind us. So in that case, I think on a situation to situation basis, obviously if I avoid pressing trigger, then my life is better. If I can remove myself from any bad situation, I always tell people when I press trigger, my life changes, right, wrong, or otherwise. And I don't really want to change what I have going on here. We've built a good life for ourselves here with my family. But specifically, yeah, it's important to realize if my attention is now here, then I have to realize that there could be other threats in the area, which is one of the reasons we always teach in our training that people need to, once they deal with a particular threat, they have to scan and assess the area for other potential threats, and maybe not even potential threats, maybe other good guys. I think Rob puts it very simply. We need to look for other bad guys that we might need to shoot, and we need to look for good guys that we don't want to shoot, and perhaps also look for anyone that might need some aid if we ever go through a complete dynamic critical incident.
The example of a lady that you used, are we? I guess this is sort of a double-sided question. Um, are we not teaching situational awareness correctly? And I get the impression that this lady had been exposed to it and had thought that the lesson that she learned was to try to stay switched on all the time. Are In general, when we look at the training world, are we training this very well?
Um, I think introducing people to the color codes, for instance, the Cooper codes, we talk about, condition white, where people are oblivious, condition yellow, where we're aware of our surroundings. We could see where potential threats may come from. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's a threat there. Condition orange, we've identified a potential threat that could materialize into an attack, or it could just be, something that we're just uncomfortable with. And at that point in time, we would enact our plan, whether that means create some space, get out of the area, speak to the individual, try and de-escalate, what have you. And then, of course, conditions red is when we have to use a tool to defend ourselves. I think the color codes are good for explaining the concept, especially to new people that are just getting into the thought process of becoming their own family's first responder, and getting into the thought process of perhaps using a defensive tool to defend their family. And in the Refuse to Be a Victim program in the NRA, whether it's a rape whistle or a firearm, ultimately, having some tool to be able to draw attention or use to defend is a good thing. And introducing people to those color codes is a good way to get them into the right headspace. But I think people take them a little too seriously or a little too literally and think that they can be applied all the time. So wherein in the home, it's much easier to negotiate that, because in the home, we will be in condition white at some time. And we all got to sleep. We all take a shower. Most of us don't carry a firearm into the shower. That's unrealistic, and probably a little silly if someone were to do that. I'm sure somebody somewhere does that, but I've thought about it. Never did. So, we're going to be in those situations where condition white happens. And in the home, for instance, we can set up infrastructure that helps us deal with that. So having a barking dog or an alarm that when the door, gets jiggled or glass breaks, an alarm goes off. And, that may not necessarily deter a bad guy, but it will buy us time to enact our plan without, just waking up to someone breathing over top of you. But out and about in the 360 world, out in public, those deceptions, hey buddy, can you, here I'm looking over here and I don't see what's going on behind me, kind of thing. Those tactics exist. And frankly, if we are involved in a dynamic critical incident, the empirical evidence shows us and tells us that it's quite likely that we're going to have such threat focus on that individual that we're engaged with. We're not, even if we wanted to look around and use our peripheral vision, we're probably not going to be able to, because of the physiological changes that happen under stress. So what I think the solution is to truly adopt a counter ambush methodology and train rather to defend yourself in the context of being in the least amount of control in the most amount of danger. And you're, of course, very familiar with this concept with the chart of doom. And, it's one of Rob Pincus's teachings, but it makes a whole lot of sense to me. So if we're training for that absolute worst case scenario, then any other time when we might have a little bit of situational awareness, perhaps we see some things going on and we can anticipate perhaps having to use that tool, then we're probably going to be better off. Most reasonable people would agree that would be the case. Again, here we're just guessing on what could possibly happen. But I think it's important that we realize that and embrace that. And I think there's freedom in embracing that.
I've a number of years ago, one of the first articles that was published here at Personal Defense Network was one I wrote called "The Myth of Situational Awareness," and I pointed out the need for this counter ambush training and the counter ambush mindset, because even if you somehow have this great amount of situational awareness, at some point, either because of overt manipulation or simply because of a natural lag in attention, the savvy criminal waits for those situations or constructs those situations to give them a point at which they can attack. And those criminals are probably more dangerous than the ones who haven't yet gotten to that point, the ones who haven't learned to watch to bide their time and to select their victims. And so, as I pointed out, it's not that situational awareness isn't useful, but that it sometimes gives people a false sense of security. The idea that, oh, I'm situationally aware, I can't be taken advantage of. Um, does that square with with what you teach and what you believe about the topic?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty much in the same thought process. One of the things that really opened my eyes to it personally, I've taught that situational awareness is key, and I still believe that it is, but I don't think it's a measurable unit. Like you must be at 10. Much like competency, some people are going to be more aware than other people, especially if some folks are preoccupied with equipment and phones and whatnot, technology. But we need to be as aware as we can be and keep our eyes open to as much information as we can. But we will get distracted. I mean, that's very possible. I mean, I teach this stuff, and I try to keep my head on a swivel all the time, and I try to be very careful, especially when I have my child with me. And there have been times I caught myself standing in the flow of pedestrian traffic, looking at a text, looking down at my little 2-inch, well, 4-inch screen, whatever it is, and not paying attention to what's going on around me. And that's very easy to do. And combine that with the criminal tactics, like you're saying, it's very easy to have our attention drawn away. I was fortunate enough to do some training with Jeff Seeley. He's a trainer here in this area that does a lot of law enforcement training. He runs a Milo range. I don't know if you're familiar with the Milo range, but it's a virtual range. You're kind of immersed in these screens, and you have adapted firearms that have compressed air, and they cycle, and you're shooting basically an IR laser at kind of a video game, for lack of a better term. I don't want to minimize it by calling it a game, but the operator is actually changing what's going to happen on the screen. And there were several of them where you're in there in a situation, whether it be in a store or, he does a lot of work with law enforcement. So there were a couple where they were set up with a bunch of officers, that type of scenario. But it's so easy. I couldn't believe how easy it was for me to focus on something that I thought was the real problem. And it turned out that something out of the corner of my eye came out, and I got hit or whatever it was, in the scenario. So combine that then with working with real stress inoculation and role players. It's just amazing how quickly your mind can, its focus can be drawn to something else in that in a stressful situation. So that really opened my eyes to it. It's one thing just to talk about it conceptually, but to try to apply it in practice, in context, in a training environment, it was really quite eye-opening to me how easily I could have my attention drawn to something that I thought was the problem, turned out not to be.
You said something, and it's funny you said this, because it was a question I wanted to ask you. Whenever we see, say, a video of an incident, or we read a news story about an incident where someone was attacked, there's always those guys that get into the comments to say, you need to have your head on a swivel 24/7, right? And it's almost a cliche. There's always somebody that's going to say this, head on a swivel 24/7, always check your six, and all this kind of thing. Is that the answer?
I suppose if you're in uniform and you're working in a bad area of town and you're on the job, maybe that would certainly be prudent. Yeah. Would that solve the problem? I suppose in the short term, but we all will burn out if we do that long enough, I think. Not all of us can do that forever and ever and ever. At some point in time, you're going to be oblivious to some part of your 360-degree world. So, having the infrastructure is a big deal. When you do have to check that cell phone text or whatever, putting your back to the wall, certainly that helps. Those kind of practices are very logical and well, actually not as logical as we think. When we teach new people that are just getting into the defensive mindset, these are like, they think you're Yoda when you say, just put your back to the wall when you look at a text. Like, wow, I never thought of that. So certain things like that can be very useful, but ultimately we're going to find ourselves focused on the wrong thing, or we're just not going to be able to look all the way around all the time and, walk around like this when we're moving throughout a birthday party at my son's friend's house or something.
So let's talk for a minute about how you go about teaching this, and because you mentioned your students several times, um, how do you introduce the concept? And because we start out, we have to introduce the concept, and before we can do anything else, what's your favorite way to introduce this concept to somebody who maybe hasn't thought along these lines before?
Just the situational awareness in general to a new person.
Yeah.
I like to equate a lot of it to driving. We can take a lot of, the NRA uses a teaching methodology called known to the unknown. And, that's one thing we can very easily do here. About driving, and let's apply that to this context, especially those who have ridden motorcycles. I don't know if you've ever been a motorcycle rider. I was been riding a long time. I haven't recently, but I did ride quite a bit when I lived in Los Angeles. And as you can imagine, there's lots of traffic in Los Angeles. There's too much traffic. But you have to think ahead, 5 steps ahead of the 4th car in front of you, to think what the guy that comes out of nowhere is going to make them do, to make the next guy do, to make the next guy do, that's going to affect you. And I think people taking that comparison, they can apply the concept of keeping their eyes open and thinking a few steps ahead. Think of it like a chess game. That seems to be very helpful, especially the driving analogies. I think that's a good way to explain it.
I rode a motorcycle for quite a number of years, and I was always kind of, I guess, a little surprised or stupefied when somebody said, "Oh, I love riding a motorcycle. It's so relaxing." To me, it wasn't, because I had to continuously, as you said, think ahead. The typical death of a motorcyclist is the car that turns left in front of them. And so you're always, looking ahead to the next intersection, who's coming up to the left turn lane, all this kind of thing. And it's very tiring to maintain that level of awareness for a long period of time. And I think that's a great analogy. And speaking of motorcycles, and I don't know if this is still very popular, but there used to be a motorcycle racing teacher by the name of Keith Code, who talked about everybody, when you're riding a motorcycle, especially when you're riding a motorcycle at speed, you only have so much attention. You can't create more attention, and you have to decide how you're going to allocate that. And he talks about having $1 worth of change. Well, if you allocate, 50 cents to this one thing, that means you'll only have 50 cents left to allocate to everything else. So you have to think very carefully about where you're going to allocate your attention and what you're going to give your attention to. And you have to ask yourself, is this important? And if it's not, maybe you shouldn't be spending so much attention on it. I always thought that was a great analogy. I always liked that. And I've heard more than one person in the defensive training world use the Keith Code analogy to describe awareness. I always thought it was really great.
Yeah, Rob actually talks about it in his home defense book, which we actually just recently cut an audio book here at the studio. I've yet to edit it. I've got several days of editing and some sweetening to do on it, but hopefully that'll be coming out here eventually.
Cool. Make sure and let everybody know when that comes out, because that's going to be cool. So we talked a little bit about how to sort of introduce this concept to people. Do you do anything specific in your classes once you've introduced the concept and people are perhaps familiar with it, or at least have been exposed to it? Is there anything you do in terms of exercises to help them learn how to apply that?
Yeah, actually, we talk quite a bit, especially with women. Women seem to, I don't know if it's a social hang up or whatever, but I try to talk to my women students they need to come into the room and they need to look around and open their eyes and make eye contact. And I think a generational thing too, with younger people, but also with females, they don't like to get eye contact with people. And I make the analogy of this: when guys come into a room, they come in, they do the man nod. We look at each other and we kind of nod. It's kind of the equivalent of maybe puffing your tail up and peeing on the floor or something like that. We just establish our space in the room, and and we show you, okay, yeah, I'm over here and you're over there, and I'm okay with that, you're okay with that, cool, we're good. And that's what men do when they walk in the room. And women don't like to get that eye contact. I'm told from talking to other female instructors, because eye contact with women is a lot more intimate. But for a woman to come in and look around, they feel that they're being overly aggressive. And I think, no, it's just showing that you're assertive, that you're not going to be an easy victim, and you're taking in information. Because if you're looking down at the ground, you're not going to see all of the things that you might need to see. And also it sets you up as someone who could be an easy target. And the criminals are going to go after the ones that are the easy target. I think last time we talked, I used this analogy with my son about, watching Animal Planet and watching how lions go after gazelles or any type of prey animal. And I'm sure he's going to correct me on what prey a lion's going to go after. But the same kind of thing applies. The ones that keep their head up, that are in the pack, that are looking around, the lions generally don't go near those ones. It's the ones in the back that are lumbering along that they victimize and that they prey upon. And the same thing applies with people. I mean, we're predators. We're built like predators, and some of us act more like predators than others, but we are predators. That's kind of how we're built. So I think it's important that people open their eyes and process information and take in information.
Someone, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but there is an old saying that someone came up with that said, if you look like food, you will be eaten. And a lot of this sort of works two ways. The being cognizant of, boy, I can't talk tonight. You said pee on the floor, and that's all I can think of now. Okay. That's probably the first time it's ever been said on Personal Defense Network.
Oh, good.
But we being aware of what's going on in your surroundings is one part of it. The other part of it is, by doing that, you do signal to the predator that maybe this isn't going to be the easy mark that they originally thought. I accidentally muted myself. Another PDN contributor, Joshua Gideon, who's been on the show a couple of times, he and I were talking once in a convention hall. We'd actually gone into a side room and sat down, and he asked a funny question. He says, why did you decide to sit here? And I said, well, it seemed like the best place. And when we started analyzing why I decided to sit where I did, it was because of proximity to entrances and exits, and the room was L-shaped, and there are issues that go along with that, and even down to the proximity of fire extinguishers. And I've been doing this so long that I don't think about it anymore. I walk into a room, I get an idea of the layout. I'm not even consciously aware that I'm doing it, but I am, and I'm making decisions on where to sit based upon what I've seen, and in some cases what I hear. And so it does, after a while, become a habit. I don't want to say it's automatic in the sense that we're not paying attention to it, but it becomes enough of a habit that you do get used to processing this information and making decisions on it. And
Sure.
After a while, you can tell what doesn't belong, and that's an important part of that.
Yeah, it's on your comment. It's funny. We would generally go out after the Sportsman's Club meeting here at my local Sportsman's Club. We go to a local restaurant. We'd have pie and coffee, and about 12 of us would go out after every meeting, and they would line up tables really long because no one wanted to sit with their back to the door, and it looked like the Last Supper. It was kind of funny, and so we would joke about that. But it to your point, it's not hard to develop that habit, to come in and just look for escapes and look for fire extinguishers. My wife and I, we sit down, and we're not taking turns reading the menu while the other one looks at the door or anything like that. But we come in, we sit down, and say, okay, there's an exit there, there's an exit there, there's the fire extinguisher. Okay, cool, and that's it. So we make up a plan on the fly. And something I always say, even a half-assed plan is better than no plan whatsoever. So coming into a new environment, well, we certainly couldn't choreograph a plan like you might at home, But in that restaurant, we have a bit of a plan. We'll come up with a code word when we go to the zoo. Okay, if I say this word, I want you to drop what you're doing, come to me, follow me, no questions asked. We're walking, follow me out. And okay, fine. So we have that discussion. We go on and we enjoy our day. But little habits like that can help alleviate some of the chaos that might happen if a bad thing were to occur. But still understanding that even with those pre-plannings and even with knowing where all the escape routes, I forget the terminology, but basically, even the best plans never happen the way they're supposed to. There's all kinds of cliches that we could say that would echo that sentiment. So we really also need to embrace the fact that we need to train for that worst case scenario, that ambush situation.
When we talk about counter ambush and that as training, what does that look like? Or let me say, how would that be different than the way most training is done? Because we've used the term quite a bit, and you explained it a little earlier on. So let's talk for just a second about how this idea of counter ambush, what it looks like when you're actually training it.
I think that probably 80% of what everyone trains is all pretty much the same dogmatically. I think it's all pretty close. I teach a lot of different curriculums for a lot of different organizations, and the vast majority of the teachings are all, it's all similar. It's all pretty close. But I think the subtle nuance that changes your standard training from the counter ambush training is that it's of the processing of the information. I mean, we stand at a square target, we yell threat, whatever the case is, you draw, you shoot at the target, then you come back to your retention and you look around and then you shoot again. And what's missing there is that process of information. So first of all, we need to recognize that target, because we're not going to draw a firearm until we've recognized a threat and made the conscious decision to say, yes, I am going to put a hole in that target. That goes back to the whole responsibility side of it. I mean, my God, we would never hunt for a threat through our sights. I mean, that's negligent and a horrible idea. We must identify that target first. So that's processing of information. We hear a noise, we feel breath in the back of our, whatever it is, we certainly do have some reactions that may occur physiologically, but we're going to have to get eyes on that threat and identify it. Then we go through with the defensive procedure, whatever that might be. Heck, it might just be run as fast as I can to that door over there. But the processing of that information, and then after we envision that threat going down, once we've engaged it, then we have to look around our area and learn something about our environment, not just simply wag our head. I've heard instructors say, and frankly, I've said this before, moving your head while you're scanning and assessing will help break tunnel vision. And as I've learned more about how the brain works, that's okay. There might be a sliver of truth to that, but it's not really what it's all about. We have threat focus because our brain is saying that is the most important thing to focus on right now, as far as your survival is concerned. Once it's gone, we need to look for other threats. Because going back to Animal Planet or watching Jurassic Park, it wasn't the raptor here that got him, it was the two on the side. So we need to look around and identify other potential threats and then deal with them appropriately. Maybe there's far enough away we can run. Maybe maybe that other potential threat isn't a potential threat. Maybe that's another concealed carry permit holder that's coming to my aid. So I need to process that information so that I can deal with that appropriately. So I think that's the difference. And it may be a subtle difference, and it may be a huge difference depending on the context of the particular training drill that you're doing, for lack of a better term. But it's all about the process of information.
We talked a little bit about entering a room, or and the examples we use were primarily restaurants, and of course looking for fire extinguishers, looking for exits, looking how the tables are arranged, how where can I go to be safe, all that kind of thing. That's great, but that's a relatively controlled environment. It's enclosed. You have limited ways to get in, limited ways to get out. What should people be looking for when they're out on the street. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's happening in 360 degrees and in a sphere, because it might be happening above us even. What are the kinds of things that the person who is situationally aware should be looking for?
Well, I mean, the lone gunman on the fourth floor building somewhere with a rifle, there's nothing we can do about that guy. If that guy targets me, then it's, there's probably no way I would see that coming, and that's just maybe my time to go. But in our general proximity, 2 arms reach and thereabouts, I think it's body language. We need to be looking and reading individuals. How are they reacting? How are they reacting as they come into my sphere, or, my what's the word, my protective bubble, and how are they reacting as I come into their protective bubble? What you're saying there, I'm envisioning like a busy sidewalk where we're bumping into people and stuff like that. Learning those precursors, those little tips, those little tells that people give. That's very useful, but you could do training on that for years and years and years. I've just started getting into that type of training. It's amazing just, how eye contact shifts, and we can get an idea of how just reading people. Poker players are really good at this, that might be a good thing, that people want to learn situational awareness and reading people. They should go play poker a lot. Perhaps that would be useful in some way. So, I think people put a lot of stress on this, and it's important. I don't want to make light of it, but there are just times, if you're in the middle at a baseball game at Dodger Stadium or something like that, what can you do? How you're looking at tens of thousands of people around you, at some point you're going to have to kind of, spend that dollar of awareness change that you were talking about before. Maybe I can't really concern myself with what's over there 50 feet away, but I can pay attention to what's in my direct sphere of influence. And knowing, okay, if someone comes near me, I set up thresholds to where if somebody in this little quadrant area starts bothering me, then I'm going to move over here. I'm going to find this escape route, or I'm going to, pull up my rape whistle and blow it. Whatever the case is, we kind of make our plans based upon the geography the best we can.
I think that's an important part of this. And it's an important part of all self-defense, is just sort of deciding ahead of time what you would do in case this happens, so that you don't have to improvise a whole response when it actually does. I don't have children, and I know you do. Can you teach these concepts to kids, and how do you go about it?
I think you can. I think I'm doing a reasonable job at it. My son calls me on the carpet a lot. We'll be in a public environment, and he says, Dad, you're looking at your phone, or Dad, you're doing this. I mean, he understands that you need to keep your eyes open and look around. And I've mentioned it before in this show, where I think I've really connected with him in this concept is just watching Animal Planet and those shows that deal with, predator and prey. You can tell by watching Mutual of Omaha how the prey animals look. I mean, the meerkats are perfect. If you wanted a lesson on situational awareness, watch a documentary on meerkats, and you'll learn everything you need to know. How they react to noise, to sound, to visual stimulus, and how they alert one another to potential threats that might be coming into their arena. So that's one way. But the animal kingdom and the human kingdom, I mean, we're all kind of similar in that regard, especially in regards to bad people doing bad things, being predators.
Excuse me, I had to cough there for a second. I think it's fascinating that he calls you on the carpet.
Oh, he does. He calls me on the carpet all the time.
I think that's awesome.
And he's been involved with me. I call him my official assistant helper. So when I'm putting on instructor training or end user courses, he's there a lot. And we can't watch television anymore. Not that we watch it too much. As we said, we've been watching the Waltons a lot lately and watching a few other shows on Netflix. But whenever someone comes in contact with a firearm, he's like, Dad, he's not employed. His fingers on the trigger, and he's a sponge, man. So yeah, he calls me on the carpet all the time, and he calls other people on the carpet. He's disrupted many a conversation that's been going on between adults, and if he's right, I let him disrupt. That's a good point, buddy. So I think it's totally feasible to have these discussions with a child.
Now, how old is your son?
He's 9.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
he's 9 going on 40. He's very smart.
That's great. I think that's awesome that he has that a level of understanding at that
Yes.
age. I think
Yes,
that's awesome. And of course, you do the thing with him where when you go into a mall, you talk about the code word or a public place, and obviously he gets that at 9 years old, which I think is cool. That's great. Like I said,
I've always wanted, when he was first born, I'm sure every parent, we want to shield our kids from bad stuff. And, every night I tell him, dream of duckies and bunnies and kitty cats. I want him to have a very pleasant, nice childhood, but I have to prepare him to survive in the world. And, not that where we live is somewhere that it's a survival game every day. We don't, we live in a great country. Even bad parts of this country are much greater than other places in the world. But I owe it to him to give him these skills so that he can make his way as an adult and avoid bad situations. Because if he presses trigger, his life changes, down the road when he ends up using a defensive tool or adopting that mindset. So, if we can avoid anything, then great. Absolutely. That just saves us time. If we can, when seconds count, police are minutes away. That's why we carry a firearm. Well, if I can buy police those minutes by keeping my eyes open and staying out of a situation, call 911, being a good witness, then let them do their job. They're excellent at it. And then I don't have to. Then I don't have to go through the legal and the financial and the moral aftermath either if I survive that initial physical encounter.
Awesome. Well, believe it or not, we are getting really close to being out of time. So if you, Clint, tell us how people can get in touch with you and what kinds of instruction courses and that kind of thing that you offer.
Oh, I have quite a full plate. I have a recording studio, as you can see, but in the last couple of years, I've been doing more of the training than even in the studio. I've been doing about 70% of the training. You can see my schedule on triggerpressersunion.com. That's triggerpressersunion.com. And I've got classes in the Pittsburgh area. I've been traveling around a lot. I will actually be doing 2 seminars a day at the NRA Carry Expo that's going to be in Milwaukee coming up. They've got me in the same page as Steve Torini and Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. I think that's quite an honor to be on the same website with those guys. But so I'll be doing some seminars there. I have an ICE Fundamentals of Concealed Carry class later this month here in New Kensington in the Pittsburgh area. And I also have some cool news. We're talking about perhaps opening up some other Trigger Pressers Union locals in a few other towns coming up. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you for joining me tonight and talking about this idea of situational awareness. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and taking time away from your family to do this, and hope we can do it again real soon.
Oh, and I thank you for the opportunity, Grant. And again, while I have the mic, I thank Rob Pincus for all his help and his mentorship and support. He's been a wonderful, wonderful mentor for me, and I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. I do appreciate it. Oops, there we go. So we're going to wrap this up. We've got just about a minute and a half or perhaps just a little more. I want to talk for just a second about premium membership here at Personal Defense Network. I haven't talked about that yet tonight. And of course, you're familiar with the public side of Personal Defense Network. We also have a premium membership side where you can access full length, like DVD length videos on various self-defense and preparedness topics, video collections, access to online courses that we have there, and lots of other stuff. There's just tons and tons and tons hours, hundreds of hours of video and instruction on the premium side of Personal Defense Network. You can sign up for it. It's usually $39.95, I think, a year. But if you sign up through the show, and there's a link at the bottom of the show page, just click on that to sign up for premium membership. And when you get to the checkout line, in the coupon code box or discount code box, I don't remember which they call it, just put in this code, Grant10, Grant, the number 1, the number 0, all one word, Grant10, and you'll get your first year of premium membership here at Personal Defense Network for only $10. It's a whale of a deal. It'll give you, and it's not like limited. This is like, full access for your first year for $10. So you can get in, take a look at all the great stuff that we have on the premium side of Personal Defense Network. And I am just scratching the surface. And as I've said before, I've been a member since we started premium membership here at Personal Defense Network, and I haven't seen everything there. There's just so much really terrific, great, vetted information from truly knowledgeable people. So premium membership at Personal Defense Network for $10 for your first year. When you go to checkout, just put in the code GRANT, the number 1, the number 0, Grant10, and you'll get your first year for $10. So what a deal. Take advantage of that. Our next show will be July 20th, Thursday. Again, same time, 6 p.m. Pacific, same place right here at Personal Defense Network. You can always send me an email at grant@grantcunningham.com. I love to get the emails, feedback on the show, questions that I can answer. Sometimes I even use those questions on the show so people can get, other people can get value out of those. So please do send your emails. I do appreciate it. You can always reach me, of course, at on my website, grantcunningham.com, where you'll see my classes, all of the books that I've written. And in fact, I just finished up book number 10. So be looking for a new book coming out. It's going to be very interesting, I think, for folks. Take a look at that, watch that. That'll be coming out by the end of this month. And hopefully I'll see you in a training class soon, or if not, perhaps with one of our really terrific contributors here at Personal Defense Network. So until the 20th, 2 weeks from tonight, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, stay safe. We'll see you then. Good night, everybody.